that we've seen how to interact with a running program, let's go back to variables, and we're going to do some processes like addition, for example. And then we're going to take it back in the context of a running program to add two numbers. So let's start with that. So let me just go ahead and clear all this. Okay, so let's say we have num1 equals 5, num2 equals 9, and then the result will be the sum of these two variables, num1 plus num2. Now we can print that result. We can also print it with a message, something like this, result equals, right? Remember that? And then result. Okay, let's see how this works. So let's go ahead and run this. We could run it from here, right mouse click here, or you can click right here where it says run program. Okay, and you can see here the result is 14. So we're adding two integer numbers. And again, review if we want to do a float. So if I do a 9.0, let's go ahead and run this. And notice now I end up with a 14.0. So by adding an integer to a float, you will always end up with a float value, even though it's 14 as far as the scale is concerned, but it is, result is holding a float. So there's an order of precedence here in terms of, if you mix an integer with a float, you're going to end up with a float. Perfect. So now, what if this 9 here was a string? Right? Or a character. What would happen when you add these two together? Right? So you're adding a 5 plus a 9. Now we're going to get an error here. Okay? So you cannot mix a number with a string. In this particular case, an integer with a string. It didn't matter if it's an integer, it could be a float. You're going to end up in the same issue here. So 5.0, as you can see here, you can't mix a float with an str. But you can surely mix an integer with a float. That's not a problem. Now, what if both of them were strings? So something like this, right? So this plus here, this operator here, will change meaning. It's no longer an addition. This is what we call an operator overloading. So what's going to happen is it will concatenate these two strings together. So let's go ahead and run it. As you can see, you end up with 89. So you have to be really mindful as to what data type we're dealing with when we're ready to do some process, either with an operator plus, minus, multiply, or whatever it is we're doing. And in this case, we intended initially to do an arithmetic operation. Right now, we ended up with a concatenation operation. So from a running program, while it's running, remember I promised we're going to be doing that. Let's say we say input, enter a number. So we've seen this before, so we can actually interact with the user with the input function, okay, and enter the next number. Now here's the problem with this. This will act as if these two were strings. Let's prove that. So let's go ahead and run this. Notice here it's asking me for a number. Let me enter 78. And then it's asking me to enter another number. Well, let's put 9.3. Now we would think we're adding numbers here. So watch what happens. 789.3. So in the end, it concatenated. Aha. So there must be something about input, even though it's interacting with the program, but it's not handling it as a number. So the input in itself returns a string to num1. This input here returns a string to num2. So whatever you type at the prompt will be a string by default. So it has to be converted to a number. And to do that, we're going to do something called typecasting. Typecasting means you're going to modify the data type you have in your hand. So if you have a string, you want to modify it to a float or an integer. So to do this, I'm going to write float right in front of it, open the parentheses, and make sure you close the parentheses right here. So notice the parentheses here, which means this whole item here, this whole item or the input statement as a function is an argument to the float as if it's a function. Basically what it's doing, it's going to typecast it. That means it's going to take this string here, turn it into a float, and give it to num1. We're going to do the same thing here, float. And then don't forget to put a parentheses here. So as many parentheses you have in this direction, you're going to have it in the other direction. Now let's watch the behavior of this one. So again, we're going to enter 67.1. And I'm going to enter 1.1. So what do you think the result will be? Now remember, we're typecasting a string to a number. So now we have numbers. Num1 and num2 are numbers of float type. So this will be a real addition of these two numbers. And sure enough, we have 68.1. Now the only issue you're seeing here, 911999999, that's because we didn't set the precision as to how we want, or how many digits do we want the precision to be. Okay, that's the only issue you're seeing there. Okay, so because really 1.1 and 1 is really 2, so 199999 is really 2. So it's an approximation that the computer is doing, right? So if you see here, you have 0.1 and 0.1, should have been 0.2, but we ended up with 0.199999. Now if you round this up, it's 0.2. Now we haven't done any formatting for rounding the result to 1 decimal point, just like my inputs. So that means as you enter these numbers, they were already entered with that much in terms of precision. Okay, so keep that in mind. Eventually what's going to happen to really write this properly is we're going to have to do some formatting. That will be our next video. How to format a number to set its precision, right? So it's more indicative as to how precise are we at this stage. Okay, so now that we've seen this, let me just recap here. So if we had num1 equals, and I will do a float here, but this time I'm not going to do an input, and I'm going to do something like this, 6. So, and let's do num2 equals float, so we can see that we are again typecasting an actual string, right? And then we're going to add these guys, so result equals num1 plus num2, and then we're going to print result. And then result. Now watch what happens here. Now these are integers. So let me just, not floats. I'm sorry, let me just go ahead and do integers. Int, and this is how you typecast to integer. So int. We could do floats, but for this example, we're going to focus on integers. Let me make sure I don't have too many parentheses. Let me make sure here. So I am going to typecast to integer. My result should be an integer. Now let's run this. And sure enough, 6 plus 1 is 7. Had you not put int in front of it, let's remove that. And let's remove that. Then what you will end up with is a concatenation right there. Okay, so we're going to explore more of these techniques as we move forward to our next video. I'll see you then.